This edition of Fed Gov Today with Francis Rose is sponsored by NetScope. On this edition of Fed Gov Today with Francis Rose, halfway through the Justice Department's IT strategic plan, CIO Melinda Rogers on the path for the second half. The zero trust component that your agency shouldn't forget. And the federal government's watchdog takes a close look at the Pentagon's books. Welcome to Fed Gov Today with Francis Rose. The Justice Department's nearly three-quarters of the way through its current IT strategic plan. That plan revolves around 5 goals. Melinda Rogers is the Chief Information Officer at the Justice Department. Melinda, welcome. Thanks for joining me. We'll go through the 5 goals here in just a moment. What is your assessment of where you are this far along in the execution of this plan?
Francis, nice to see you again. I think we're tracking very well to the 5 goals that we have laid out in our IT strategic plan. Certainly, we've been fielding ad hoc projects that come along the way, but overall, I'm very proud of the work our organization is delivering on, and we're going to continue to work on those between now and the end of the strategic goal, at which point we'll certainly reassess and determine what's after that.
Goal 1, enhance service delivery. Goal 2, elevate cybersecurity. Goal 3, embrace innovation. Goal 4, expand the workforce. And Goal 5, increase financial transparency. How did you decide that those were the 5 things that you wanted to focus on for the life of this plan?
That's a great question, Francis. I think ultimately these 5 are critical pillars for the reason for a CIO's office to exist. They set the direction in which we should head. We can certainly change out the specific objectives we want to hit or the specific projects we want to hit, but ultimately it is about optimizing the end user experience, and we have to do that securely, protecting our information systems. We have to continue to innovate, not just adopt the shiniest new objects. Yes, we always want to modernize, but we also can creatively look at doing things with processes and changing things up for the better that way. Workforce, that's the heart and soul of an organization. And of course, financial transparency. A lot of times people ask me, why do I have that as one of the pillars? While it's not an exact widget of itself, the reality is everything is dependent on IT these days. Every organization is spending a lot of money on IT. So it's incumbent upon a CIO to really look at our financial investment in the IT arena to make sure we're maximizing our returns on them.
How does one build a plan like this and build flexibility into it so that you can accommodate those ad hoc things that come along? For example, in Goal 2, elevate cybersecurity, when this plan came into existence, zero trust existed, but it wasn't really the priority that it is today. How do you put something like this together to accommodate that kind of change throughout the life of it?
So I like to refer back to an 80-20 rule. It is not precisely 80, not precisely 20, but at the end of the day, we need to have a baseline. For example, cybersecurity. We have to know what assets we have in our environment, who is accessing our environment, and then the 20% is up to what's going to come potentially unexpectedly. But at the end of the day, it's important for us to lay out a path of where we want to go. At DOJ, we've always taken cybersecurity very seriously. As the former CISO, it's still very near and dear to my heart. And it's about continuing to improve upon what we already have in place. We didn't just wake up one morning and said, zero trust, we're going to go there. But the reality is zero trust is about knowing what you have, who you have. We've been on that journey for some time, and now it's about elevating where we've been to the next level, leveraging zero trust brokers to really get down to a much more granular level on allowing who and what should have access to our information systems.
You've spoken recently about a plan to strengthen identity management. They are not implying that it was weak before, but it's one of the core pillars of zero trust. What's your plan? What's the path look like to strengthen ID management?
I think with identity management is especially critical for a large organization like Justice. We have 40+ component offices on any given day, 120,000 employees. If you add in contractors, we're talking about 165,000 people. Initially, I would say that part of the program, the identity management part, is largely managed out of our component offices. But then the reality is, as we continue on our cybersecurity journey, we're realizing we have individuals that might start off working for one office, go on a detail assignment at a different office. So it's important that we know from a cybersecurity perspective that it's the same person, that we don't have a duplication of identities that we're attempting to track. And that's critical for ultimately figuring out to what degree do we have a strong posture in place. So with identity management, that's an initiative we're really doubling down on, is how do we deduplicate the counting of the people and really honing in on the person, the individual. What information systems should this person have access to? That could change depending on the office and capacity and role. So it's getting down to a much more granular level.
How do you manage culturally that idea of moving from a more siloed operation to an enterprise operation without conveying the idea we're trying to smash this down your throat from HQ?
Yes, that's a balance I have to strike every day. I have to try, at least.
Yeah.
It's definitely a collaboration, a partnership with all the component offices. We couldn't do a lot of the enterprise work that we've done so far without the component IT shops supporting us, giving us feedback, good and bad. Sometimes we need the bad. Actually, we need the bad more probably than the good, so that we can make sure we deliver the best services. It is about discussing and communicating about what both sides need. The department level, at the department level, we want to have a good, secure infrastructure, and that means minimizing the number of entry points. At the component level, they want maximal entry points for flexibility. So it is about coming to the table, understanding what each other's needs and wants are, and coming up with a collaborative solution that meets the mail for both sides.
I want to go back to the strategic plan. Goal number 4 is expanding the workforce. It's interesting to me that you chose that verb to go with that noun. Everybody wants to do that. What's the differentiator potentially for the Justice Department being able to do that?
I'm glad you asked that. I was actually driving over here thinking about which one do I want to lead with in terms of accomplishments across these 5 goals. I actually thought about leading with workforce. As I mentioned earlier, it's the heart and soul of our program. At the end of the day, yes, we are about information technology, automation, systems, zeros and ones, but we can't affect all of that without having the right people in place. When we first began the journey of this particular period of the IT strategic plan, we were still sort of in the throes of the pandemic, where we had a lot of people who took early retirement, moved to different places. But fortunately, we've had good partners from our counterparts in HR, human resources, who've really focused in on helping us bring in the talent from the outside that cover both the senior executive rank and the GS levels as well. But I want to also add, we also used that opportunity, that turnover, the vacancy that was created, to look at candidates who want to advance their career from within. So we had a lot of promotion from within, which I'm very proud of. So it's been a really good blend. I'm very excited about the team that we've built over the last couple of years, and I'm looking forward to what we can deliver, can continue to deliver for the Department of Justice.
Did you have an opportunity in that process to change the structure, maybe the types of workforce people that you needed to put in? Or was it just a matter of kind of filling from behind? Imagine a lot of it involved, well, maybe now we can rethink the way we want to put these people, or how we want to deploy these people.
It's definitely the latter. The world changes so fast these days. It's always about looking at what skill sets do you need for today, and also maybe for the next 2-3 years. We can't stay static, otherwise we will become irrelevant and not competitive. And at Justice, you asked earlier, what is my differentiator? I would say really the body of work. We have some really exciting, interesting missions among our component offices. Being in the middle of law enforcement, full life cycle law enforcement support, you could work on projects that have to do with the investigation side or the prosecution side, litigation side, and also incarceration. So for anybody who's maybe just coming out of school, wanting to start their career, or somebody who's in the middle of their career trajectory, wanting some good, meaningful experiences, I have plenty of that to offer.
We have about a minute left. How do you measure, as you're going through this plan, that whether you're having success or whether you need to rethink things and move in a different direction?
I think at the end of the day, those goals were carefully selected. So at least I don't intend to move them, but it's about the objectives that we want to achieve below that. And I'm a big numbers person. I believe in measuring by numbers. So every situation, you might have a different metric. I'll pick on service delivery as an example. One of our modernization initiatives is about overhauling our website. We have close to 400,000 web pages to go through, and making sure that we have input from our customers, external stakeholders, and internal, including the public. And we're about 70% of the way through. We expect to finish by the end of the year. So again, those are numbers I can grasp and measure off. Are we tracking in the right direction? Are we on schedule, behind schedule? So I think it comes down to figuring out what numbers to use to measure the outcome.
Melinda Rogers, it's great to see you. Thanks very much for joining me.
Thank you, Francis.
You can find a link to the Justice Department's IT strategic plan at fedgovtoday.com. Coming next, the zero trust component that your agency shouldn't forget. Fed Gov Today with Francis Rose continues in a moment. If you want insights from agency and industry leaders on the latest topics in technology, management, workforce, defense, and acquisition, sign up for the Fed Gov Today podcast with me, Francis Rose. I release new episodes every Tuesday and Thursday, so you'll stay up to date on the issues that matter most to federal government leaders. Listen at fedgovtoday.com and everywhere you get your shows. Don't miss out on the conversation. Follow the podcast today. Welcome back. A new zero trust maturity model's out from the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. CISA says its goal for the model is to align it to the federal zero trust architecture strategy. Beau Hutto is Vice President of Federal at NetScope. Beau, welcome. Thanks for joining me today. What are the architecture concepts that people in agencies should be thinking about to maximize where they're trying to go on zero trust?
Now, Francis, hey, thanks for having me here. It's a pleasure, and we're I think simple is better at the end of the day, right? Less is more, and being able to truly modernize your architecture is at the forefront. Mm-hmm. And what that means is an architecture that allows you a single pass architecture instead of this hairpinning that we've done for decades, mm-hmm. right? I think this is the first time in 25 years we've actually had an opportunity to rethink, okay, now that we have all of this moving to the cloud, all this data movement to the cloud, which is our most important resource at this point, other than people, right, of course. But what we're trying to protect is really that data. Mm-hmm. And being able to do that in a way that's really effective, that allows you to transition from on-prem to cloud controls, I think is at the forefront.
That 25-year call out is interesting to me because I came into this space 17, 18 years ago, and there was a lot of discussion when I first came into this space about enterprise architecture. Did a number of interviews, lots of shows about it, and so on. That concept faded away until I would say the zero trust concept revived this discussion around architecture. Is that what you're referring to, that this is an opportunity to really update what's underneath the hood, I imagine?
It is, and I think it's more about how things have transitioned to the cloud as much as it is zero trust, because I think the zero trust was really brought by the transition of data movement to the cloud and how you're going to put controls around the data that's living and breathing within the new edge boundary. Mm-hmm. The boundary is no longer brick and mortar, right? It is out at, you're one of the big three cloud service vendors out there. It's back on premise. It's on our mobile devices, whether it's the watch or the mobile device you have in your pocket.
How does that make an information security official's job in government different in that kind of environment than it was in a perimeter architecture environment?
So with the perimeter architecture environment, you controlled what was within that castle and moat architecture, right? And you knew if it was inside of that, it was protected, right? You might have the insider threat at that point, but that was a whole different realm and opportunity to go down and find. With this now, it's all about the data, and as soon as it leaves your boundary of protection, it's now considered compromised. So it is the duty of the security organization to now make sure that the data is staying within the boundary as much as it is to look for malware and DLP violations and things of that nature to assure that that data is kept within the boundary and kept, within the constraints of that agency.
Generative AI, obviously very hot. A lot of people in agencies talking about it. Some agencies are doing pilot projects and so on. What's the wrinkle potentially the generative, easy for me to say, AI puts into this discussion?
So generative AI is hot, right? It's being talked about all around the world. You see big companies making moves and government to leverage the technology, and it's worth leveraging. But just like anything else, generative AI is no more than another SaaS application, right? ChatGPT and others. So what we need to be able to do is assure that the controls are in place to make sure that the data in which you share externally into a generative AI environment, into that SaaS, is not PII. It is not source code, right? It's not intellectual property of your agency. And that is no different than what you're doing today with SaaS applications currently. But it's a different mindset. There are policies that need to be written around that. I think the policy and really the workflows that have gone on traditionally need to be enhanced, right? They need to be taken to the next level. The security teams need to look at the threat differently because the threat has changed so massively over the past 3, 4, 5 years.
Beau Hutto, thanks very much for joining me today. I appreciate it.
No, hey, thank you very much, Francis.
You can read more about Zero Trust at fedgovtoday.com. Up next, the federal government's watchdog takes a close look at the Pentagon's books. Fed Gov Today with Francis Rose continues in a moment. If you want insights from agency and industry leaders on the latest topics in technology, management, workforce, defense, and acquisition, sign up for the Fed Gov Today podcast with me, Francis Rose. I release new episodes every Tuesday and Thursday, so you'll stay up to date on the issues that matter most to federal government leaders. Listen at fedgovtoday.com and everywhere you get your shows. Don't miss out on the conversation. Follow the podcast today. Welcome back. Fiscal year 2023 is year 5 of the Defense Department's quest to make its financial records auditable. But some parts of the department still have some fundamentals to take care of before they can get there. Asif Kahn is Director of Financial Management and Assurance Issues at the Government Accountability Office. Asif, welcome. It's great to talk to you again. You're a witness recently at a hearing on this subject before subcommittees of the House Oversight Committee. What was the message you wanted to convey in your testimony?
Francis, first, thank you for having me here. The message from Congress is that they're very interested in DoD's stewardship of taxpayers' dollars, that they're spending taxpayers' money wisely. The message from me was that DoD is making progress, that they have undergone audits. However, it's pretty clear to see that they have not reached an opinion yet that is of great concern to Congress because they equate transparency and accountability with a clean opinion. Based on our work, there are several steps that DoD can take to position themselves for success in these audits.
Yeah, they equate transparency and accountability with clean audits. That's Congress's view. Is that necessarily the right view, or are there other ways to judge whether the department is achieving the goals that a clean audit would obviously demonstrate, but there might be other ways to find that?
Right, there could be, but in an organization the size and complexity of DoD, the best way to track that is through a clean audit opinion. But there are several other indicators which are a result of an audit, such as findings and recommendations and material weaknesses. So if DoD and Congress wants to track, they need to look at how DoD is remediating the findings and also the material weaknesses. Currently, there are 28 of them. This is more than the rest of the federal government.
So those material weaknesses, I saw some work that you've done recently. Those 28, that number's not really gone down much over time. I know 3 material weaknesses consolidated into others, 3 new material weaknesses to keep the total at 28. Is that churn that's normal in a process that the department is going, like one the department's undergoing?
Correct. I mean, that churn is normal. There would be aggregation and disaggregation of findings and material weaknesses. However, the trend is not going in the right direction. The trend is continuing to go up. DoD is remediating about 20% of their findings every year, and there are new findings coming every year because the scope of the audit is expanding. So as you can see that, if they continue about 22% every year, it's going to take them several additional years to be able to get to a clean audit opinion.
You'll go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, having said that, there are many benefits to undergoing these audits. DoD is realizing financial benefits and they're realizing operational benefits. So the results of the audit, DoD is learning their own business processes and they are remediating those to make it more efficient and effective. One
of the analogies that a colleague of mine told me about, former Defense Department financial management leader, was this is like when you refurbish a house and you pull the walls out and you look at the foundation, and as you continue to do that, you find things that you didn't know were there that also need to be fixed to really fix things up. Is that a fair analogy?
That is a fair analogy. Just to add to that, DoD continues to do that, but they need to build a new process, because these are antiquated, older legacy processes. We talk about legacy systems, but we need to recognize that many of these business processes goes back to 1950s and 60s. At that point, it made sense because they were meant to really support the mission, DoD's mission. Same with the systems, but financial management wasn't really considered in that. Now they have a chance to rebuild this from the ground up with a fresh foundation, so they need to be doing that.
As you examine these things that the department is doing, do you find that they're doing that they're leveraging that opportunity to the maximum extent?
To some extent. In that respect, tone at the top, leadership across multiple administrations is critical. Sustained leadership for sustained change, for lasting change, is very important. So the focus of the leadership also needs to change because they need to recognize it was the inception. Now they're somewhere in the middle. So they need to create a condition where people are open to doing business different than what they had done in yesteryears.
Just the fact that we're talking about this to the extent that we are strikes me as significant. You and I had this conversation, I think, at the very beginning of this process in another venue. Is the department in a good place, considering that they're halfway through what the original timeline was supposed to be 10 years for them to get to a clean opinion?
It's in a good place because they know at least some of the challenges, but there are many challenges that remain, in part because the audit is still continuing to expand. There's a great deal to be discovered. So there are challenges that need to be remained, but they can help themselves by creating better plans, having a good roadmap so everyone is addressing these issues across the department in a consistent manner.
What do those plans look like, or is that for the department to determine? You're just observing the fact that those plans are not as good as they could be?
Correct. The department needs to develop that. The key of that is to create a department-wide vision as to how audit is going to come together. That's pretty critical. The next one is that all the components, Army, Navy, Air Force, need to follow that plan consistently, because eventually you're trying to develop enterprise-wide processes and systems. They need to connect and communicate with each other so the data is consistent and it makes sense when it's generated at the end of the process.
One particular place that you wrote about when you looked at this issue in May, DoD's consistently missed target remediation dates provided in its DoD-wide roadmap. Why is that important, Asif?
Because without that, they'll not be able to project what the timeline is. Without that, they will not be able to identify where the vulnerabilities and challenges are, so they can reprioritize their resources, put the focus on where the challenges are, essentially looking at the longest tent in the pole. So it's very important for them to be able to do that. And one way they can do that is by creating interim milestone dates, because at this point they have, we'll end at a certain date, and when that date comes and they haven't reached that particular goal, then that timeline slips. They can't do any crisis management before that end reaches.
So what I hear long term is that the Pentagon has a good idea of when they want to finish the journey. They could do a little bit more on how they're going to hit interim markers between now and and 5 years from now to hit that original 10-year plan. Is that a fair assessment overall?
That's very much fair assessment, Francis. So the timeline can get extended because they may find new challenges. They may find that a particular approach, which they thought was very successful, may take additional time. But that's along the right path.
What are the bright spots and what are the success stories among all of the individual parts of the department, and what are those organizations doing well that other organizations might be able to take notes from?
Well, there are 9 organizations that received an opinion. Several of those 9 organizations have been receiving a clean audit opinion for a decade or longer. So that needs to be recognized. It points that DoD can achieve a clean audit opinion. The other one is that DoD is also replacing a number of legacy systems with modern systems. That is very important. Though DoD has some ways to go to be able to replace the other older systems with a newer one, but that's, again, a step in the right direction.
As those system replacements come online, is it reasonable to think that there might be big gains in the organizations that are deploying those systems because they were using something that was old, not as functional as it needed to be, with something that's highly functional theoretically?
That's yet to be seen, Francis, and I say that because DoD has got multiple layered systems. So if they're replacing the systems at the top, they'll still be fed information from the other systems at the bottom layers. So those have to be replaced. So essentially, all the foundation has to change before it will begin to show results.
Less than a minute left. What's your sense of the data that's flowing through those systems and the quality of it for the department to be able to use it to make decisions and meet the audit?
There's still room for improvement. It's better than when it was before, but because of the legacy systems, because of the tertiary and secondary systems, there's still a lot of data which is bad, which needs to be cleaned up before it can begin to make any sense.
And quick final thought, what will you continue to look at as time goes on in what the department's doing?
Very much the remediation activity, correcting the material weaknesses, and then very much the tone at the top, that is, it's in sync with what's needed now and what's needed in the future. That's going to be very important.
Asif Kahn, it's great to talk to you again. Thanks very much for your time.
Thank you, Francis.
You can read more about DoD's audit and find links to Asif's work at fedgovtoday.com. Fed Gov Today with Francis Rose is back in a moment. If you want insights from agency and industry leaders on the latest topics in technology, management, workforce, defense, and acquisition, sign up for the Fed Gov Today podcast with me, Francis Rose. I release new episodes every Tuesday and Thursday, so you'll stay up to date on the issues that matter most to federal government leaders. Listen at fedgovtoday.com and everywhere you get your shows. Don't miss out on the conversation. Follow the podcast today. Welcome back. In today's event spotlight, the GovForward FedRAMP Headliner Summit is coming August 23rd at the Waldorf Astoria in D.C. Speakers from GSA, Capitol Hill, and industry will teach you what's new and what's next in securing the cloud in the federal government. I'll be your MC for the day. You can read more about the event and register at govforward.com. Fed Gov Today returns next Sunday morning at 10:30. Mike Darios, the Senior Procurement Executive at the State Department, and Charlie Armstrong, the CIO at FEMA, will be here. Hope you will be too. I'm Francis Rose. Thanks very much for watching. If you want insights from agency and industry leaders on the latest topics in technology, management, workforce, defense, and acquisition, sign up for the Fed Gov Today podcast with me, Francis Rose. I release new episodes every Tuesday and Thursday, so you'll stay up to date on the issues that matter most to federal government leaders. Listen at fedgovtoday.com and everywhere you get your shows. Don't miss out on the conversation. Follow the podcast today.